What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and today we're revisiting Velidreth versus Mephala on a stamina DK. So for those of you guys who weren't aware, I was running into some issues over in the observatory prior, which was the house I was using to test things on, where the Velidreth proc actually wasn't hitting the dummy. So I decided to move to Tel Galen, where I know the Velidreth proc will hit the dummy. So we're just going to revisit Velidreth versus Mephala to kind of figure out which monster helm is going to be best. I've already done a couple of parses already, so we're just going to go ahead and get started with the parses. Everything's pretty much going to remain exactly the same as it was for the original video. Still using Thunder Flame, Vegisophidian, 2 daggers, Nirnhoned with a poison weapon enchant on the main hand, and infused weapon damage on the offhand. We're going to be using a Nirnhoned Maelstrom Bow, and with a double Ravage health poison. Of course, we're going to be using Mephala's and Velidreth. Those are the only two things we're going to switch out. Have a medium head with stam, and a heavy shoulders with health. This is still raid CP, so we're not using the lover, not using anything, and not dumping points into piercing. This is all just raid CP. We're just going to do a parse on each, collect some of additional data points so we can figure out which helm is actually better for a stam DK. So one thing to note though is I do already have an opinion on which helm I would use, regardless of the results, and I will share those with you after we compare numbers. So we're just going to go ahead and get started with our 2 parses. So that is our Mephala parse. Let's go let our stam get back up, and then we're going to do our Velidreth parse. That should be good enough. Now some of you guys might be wondering why I have a heavy piece with a health enchant, and that's just because all the characters that I'm using on the PTS are copies of my real characters on the live server, and currently in one of my raiding guilds we are progressing through Asylum Hard mode, and so part of that progression is actually just increasing the health of all of the DPS, so that way we have 18,000 health with food. That's just so we can survive better in the fight. It certainly has helped, but at the same time, stamina in VAS definitely get butchered a lot. So while the extra help is helpful, we're not sure exactly how much it's helping by. Certainly making some one-shots survivable, but we're still getting one-shot by a couple of mechanics, so we're trying to figure things out. But that is something to keep in mind. Though I did end up putting a couple points into health to kind of hit the 18k threshold that we were kind of setting for ourselves. Alright, so that was the Mephala parse. So we got, that's a bit of a low end, 36,482 for Velidreth parse. And for Mephala parse, we got, let's see, 37,326. So that's kind of what we're looking at right here. Mephala beat out Velidreth for this set of parses. However, we're going to swap over to our to the other parses that I've done earlier. So we can see here we have 6 parses on each side, so 12 parses in total. This is all the Velidreth parses. These are all the Mephala parses. Here I have the averages for all the parses, and below that are the standard deviations. And right here is the percentage difference between the highest, or I guess Velidreth versus Mephala. So we can see here that Velidreth is pulling about 3/4 of a percentage point higher than Mephala. That's kind of to be expected because we're not really getting Mephala to proc on cooldown. If we were able to proc Mephala on cooldown, then Mephala could possibly pull ahead from Velidreth. However, it seems like Veli is still pulling ahead. And even if Mephala does end up outparsing Velidreth when it's procced on cooldown, I still probably wouldn't use Mephala in a raid scenario. And to show you guys why, I'm just going to swap back to the set here. Alright, so we can see here Mephala compared to Velidreth. Mephala gives you max stam, Velidreth gives you weapon damage. The extra stam is nice for the extra sustain, but it's really not going to make or break you, and even though stam does increase your effective weapon damage, it doesn't increase it as much as Velidreth does. And the 2-piece effect, when you deal damage with the fully charged heavy attack, you deal a web for 10 seconds that deals 15-18 poison damage every 1 second to all enemies within 4 meters and reduces their movement speed by 50%. So that last part there is kind of what kills Mephala for me, even though it theoretically has a higher DPS ceiling compared to Velidreth's, and that's because it deals enemy damage to all enemies within 4 meters. And that Mephala proc that you saw, the little spider hands that were on the ground with the webs, that doesn't move. That doesn't move with the boss. So basically, wherever you the boss or mob is when you deal the heavy attack, that's where the effect will be. So if you are against a fight where you have a boss that's moving around a lot, or you have a lot of adds over a relatively wide area, then Mephala loses a lot of its damage potential because it's not getting all those ticks in. On a stationary target where you can proc Mephala consistently and get all 10 ticks to hit, then yes, Mephala does become competitive with Velidreth in terms of DPS. However, such fights are actually not as common as you would think. The only trial I can think of where you have pretty much stationary bosses for the most part is going to be AA and maybe SO. Those are the only 2 I can think of where the bosses remain relatively stationary so you can get the most out of Mephala. But you also have to remember there's a lot of trash pulls involved in the trials. At least all of them except for Asylum Sanctorium, the new trial, have ad pulls. And so Mephala is really going to suffer there because, again, that 4-meter radius. Or I guess, yeah, that 4-meter radius is just very, very small. To give you an idea of just how close enemies need to be in order for that to proc, there isn't an ability with a 4-meter radius. However, there is one with a 5-meter radius, and that's Circle of Protection. So basically, it's slightly smaller than this circle right here. All the adds need to be within this circle, more or less, in order to get hit by the Mephala proc. If they move out of this circle, then Mephala loses a lot of its DPS potential, because now the ticks are no longer happening because, like I said, those webs do not follow the mobs on which it is procced on. So for that reason, even though Mephala does have a theoretical higher DPS ceiling compared to Velidreth, I can't recommend it for a Stam DK. You can use it on things like AA or maybe even Sanctum Ophidia, where the bosses are going to remain relatively still, but even then you're kind of gimping yourselves during the ad pulls, where Velidreth's You can hit up to 3 adds with the spores, and if you do need to back off, like during the Serpent's World Shaper, you can still aim yourself so that Velidreth hits the enemy. If you're on cooldown on Mephala and you have to back off the boss to play a mechanic and you can't get a heavy attack in, then Mephala starts losing a lot more DPS potential because you're not getting it, getting the proc up fast enough. So my recommendation for Stam DK is going to be Velidreth's. Mephala's is great for stationary fights, but you're also gimping yourself during those trash pulls, so I can't fully recommend Mephala at this time. However, if you don't have the DLC, if you don't have a group that can consistently and relatively easily farm Cradle of Shadows, then Mephala is a good choice until you manage to get Velidreth's. So that's it for this video. Hope you found it informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.